everybody. I hope that you're all doing well. I am super excited about today's video because I am doing my first ever true crime collab on my channel. I am collabing with the lovely Yasna from ASMR Zelda. I've mentioned her channel in my videos a couple of times. She does very similar videos like I do, very just plain whispered show and tell. She does a lot of true crime, hence why we're doing this collab. So if you like my content, you will love her content. Of course, she will be linked down in the description. So definitely check her out if you haven't yet. Show her some love. This is why the past couple of weeks I've been very quiet about when a true crime video was coming. I just kept saying soon, soon. But we've actually been planning this for weeks now. But it was just, I got sick, so I delayed it, and then she's been busy with work, so it's just been kind of a long process. But I knew that you guys would love this, so I wanted to wait on the true crime until this video was ready. So we are going to go back and forth telling you guys this story. So I hope that you find it interesting, and without further ado, let's get started.
Our story starts in Benicia, California in 1968. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were teenagers who met in high school, and they were instantly smitten with each other. David was a very smart guy, very polite, and really well liked by everyone, and Betty Lou was also a very popular girl and liked by all her peers. So 2 weeks after they met, they became a couple, and 5 days before Christmas, they went on their first official date. They promised Betty Lou's parents that they'd be home by 11, but 11 p.m. came and went, and they still weren't home. A few minutes after 11, a car driving by saw their car parked on Lake Herman Road. Now, Lake Herman Road was a very dark road, and there was not a lot of traffic on it, but it did have a lover's lane spot, a spot that teenagers liked going to make out. So, after a few minutes, another car passed and saw what he thought were lifeless bodies lying on the road. So he called police, and Benicia police arrived at the scene to find Betty Lou dead with 5 gunshot wounds to the back. They found David lying next to the car on the ground with a bullet wound in his head, but he was still breathing, and David ended up surviving the attack. They found that the car also had bullet holes in the roof and in the rear window, which indicated that the killer most likely shot the car first to force his victims to get out of the car. But there was no motive. These were really well-liked kids, and they were kids, like they were teenagers. They didn't have a fight with anyone. They had no enemies. They didn't have beef with anyone. There was just no known reason why anyone would want to kill them, and they also didn't find any evidence that could help them trace the killer. Police have said today that if they had the technology back then that they do now, they probably would have caught him, but they just didn't have that. Police concluded that these teenagers were most likely the random victim of someone who just wanted to kill someone, and eventually, after a few months, the case went cold.
More than 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, another young couple was attacked. Their names were Darlene Farron and Michael McGill, and they were sitting in a parked car about only 4 miles away from where the last occurrence happened. This time, it took space, room for children to play. And because it was July 4th, some people had gathered there around midnight, a little bit before midnight, to watch fireworks. So Darlene and Michael were sitting in Darlene's parked car, talking and watching the fireworks, when another car pulled into the lot and parked beside them. But almost immediately, the car just drove away, drove out of the parking lot. About 10 minutes later, the same car returned, but instead of parking beside them, he parked right behind them. He got out of his car, approached the passenger side of Darlene's car, shining a flashlight through the window with a gun in his hand. Originally, the young couple thought that he was a cop because of his bright flashlight, but they didn't know what he wanted. Well, he grabbed his gun again and pulled it up and shot into the car 5 times. After he shot them, he walked away back towards his car, but he heard Michael cry out in pain. So realizing that Michael was still alive, the gunman went back to the car and shot again. Then he climbed into his car and drove away. Darlene unfortunately lost her life. Michael survived with gunshot wounds to his leg, neck, and jaw. A little bit later, at 12:40 a.m., so it is now July 5th, the Vallejo Police Department received a call from an unnamed man. He spoke in a very low, monotone voice, almost as if he was reading from a script. The call was traced to a phone booth at a gas station very close to where Darlene lived. And the man on the phone said, quote, "I want to report a murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye."
Investigators from Vallejo and Benicia realized that they were searching for the same killer, and because of the phone call, they were afraid that he was going to kill more people. According to the dispatcher, the voice of the man who called the police department sounded like he was at least 30 years old or older. Michael, the surviving victim of the shooting, was able to give a description of the man. He described him in his own words as short, possibly 5'8", a white male adult, was real heavy-set, beefy build, not blubbery fat but real beefy, possibly 195 to 200 pounds or maybe even larger. Short curly hair, light brown, almost blonde, with a large face. Michael looked at photographs of different people, but he was unable to identify the suspect. 26 days after the shooting at Blue Rock Springs Park, 3 envelopes arrived at 3 different newspapers from the Bay Area. Each envelope contained a handwritten letter and a piece of coded message. The writer provided a list of details regarding the shootings to prove that he was the one who did it, and also said that if they were able to decode the message he left, that they would be able to find out his identity. And then he ended the message with a warning, and it said, "If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Friday the 1st of August 1969, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night. I will cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with 12 people over the weekend, and a crossed circle symbol had been drawn at the bottom of the page. Every newspaper published the cipher, and very quickly the whole community became extremely afraid that he would kill more people. Both professionals and amateurs tried to decode the message, and police, tried to get tips from the people and followed up on several clues. Eventually, some people at least thought they were able to decode the message, and it didn't actually reveal the identity of the killer, but it did reveal a chilling message that said, "I like killing people because it's so much fun. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow me down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." When police said that they had doubts concerning the writer's claims and that they weren't convinced that it was really him, he sent another letter in which he said that he would be happy to supply more proof to police if that was needed, meaning that he would kill more people.
Several weeks passed while this crazy manhunt ensued, and then in September of that same year, he would strike again. This time he moved up north to the Napa Valley wine country region of California. The next attack took place on September 27th, 1969, to another young couple. They were college students by the name of Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, and they were picnicking at Lake Berryessa in that area of California. Now this man, the Zodiac, he claimed to be an escaped convict, and he needed help because he was trying to get to Mexico. He said he needed their car and their money to get there. So at first, Brian thought that this was just your typical robbery, he would steal their things and leave them unharmed. But unfortunately, that is not what happened. The man took out a gun and repeatedly stabbed them both several times. Brian was stabbed 6 times, and Cecilia was stabbed 10 times. Cecilia passed away, but Brian did in fact survive. And the really creepy thing, well, there's several creepy things about this, obviously, but the creepiest thing was that he wanted people to know that it was the Zodiac that stabbed these kids and took Cecilia's life. So what he did is he walked up the hill to their car because they were picnicking, in a grassy area, not at their car. So he walked up the hill to his car, and on the door of the car he used a black marker to draw the crossed circle, and underneath that he listed the dates of the 2 previous shootings that he caused, and then added September 27th, 69, 6:30 by knife. It was like documenting these attacks and murders. Later on, because Brian thankfully survived, he was able to tell authorities what the man looked like. So he said that the man wore a black squared hood over his head and most of his face. He wore sunglasses to cover his eyes, but on his chest here, he had a white crossed circle, which was becoming his symbol, what people knew him by. At 7:30 p.m. that same day, the Napa Police Department got a call from yet another phone booth just a few blocks away from the station. The caller said in a low voice, like always, I want to report a murder. No, double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Gia. The department then obviously knew who was calling, so they contacted the detectives in the Vallejo and Penencia departments, and they all compared notes because they were obviously all looking for the same person. But somehow, with them comparing notes and picking each other's brains, they could not make any connections and therefore could not come up with any leads at the time. However, detectives were able to lift a still wet palm print on the door of the phone booth, and yet still they couldn't match it to a suspect. And like we said before, they say now that if the police departments back then had the technology that we have now, they wouldn't have had so much of a problem. But unfortunately, back then they just didn't have the technology. The next attack took place in a more upscale neighborhood in San Francisco, and it took place only just a few short weeks later on October 11th, 1969. Paul Stein was a cab driver, and he was going about his business, picking up passengers and just doing his job. He picked up a white male passenger, and he asked to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. The cab, however, was later found parked 1 block further west of where the passenger asked to be taken. No one really understands why exactly or how he got further away, but it's neither here nor there. But the cab was found later, and Paul Stein's lifeless body was found inside, dead from a gunshot wound to his head. Fingerprints in the cab, of course, were taken, and they contained traces of blood on the passenger's side, and they were believed to have been left by the killer. 3 young witnesses watched the whole thing, and they called police, of course, and while they were calling, they were watching the killer and watching what he was doing. They saw him standing on the side of the car where the fingerprints were found, and he was using a piece of the driver's blood-stained shirt that he had ripped into multiple pieces. He was using a strand of the shirt to try to wipe down the car. We can assume it's to get rid of any fingerprints, any traces of him. He was wiping the whole exterior of the car on that side. Eventually, authorities realized that this was the Zodiac that they were dealing with, because he started to send them scraps of Paul Stein's shirt in envelopes. He did it multiple times. He kept these scraps of the shirt, probably because he knew that he was going to taunt them in this way. So 2 days later, a letter was sent that, like I said, contained a scrap of the shirt, and a letter that ended with him talking about his possible next mission. I'm going to read you a quote. "School children make nice targets, I think. I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out." Is that not the most terrifying thing you've ever heard? So, of course, safety measures were put in place. There were patrol cars that followed school buses to and from school. There were, cops and people who were well armed riding in the school bus with the children as well every day. Thank goodness. But now back to those 3 witnesses that were watching him wipe the exterior of the car. They their description to the police department, and a sketch was made, and it was released to the public with a written description as well that said, white male adult in early 40s, 5'8", heavy build, reddish blonde hair, crew cut hair, wearing glasses, dark brown trousers, dark blue parka jacket, and dark shoes. So now people in the world knew who they were looking for. 2 blocks from that cab scene, 2 police officers were actually responding to the call when they saw a white man walking on the sidewalk towards a house, and they didn't think anything of it at the time. They didn't know the description at the time, and now people think that that was actually the Zodiac that they passed by. They just didn't know it, which is super, super frustrating if that's true. So now that authorities were becoming more vocal about this, with people living in that area, the people had his sketch, had his description, a lot of people were, trying to be clever or funny, and the police department actually received a lot of false tips, saying, oh, I'm the Zodiac, or I know who the Zodiac is, but they really didn't. Which, we love people for doing things like that. Infamous defense attorney Melvin Belly, who was very well known at the time, he spoke on a televised phone call on a show with a man who actually claimed to be the Zodiac. They televised it, but it turned out that he was just a patient at a mental hospital. So that's just one example of the false tips and claims that they were getting. So now the real Zodiac realized that people were trying to steal his spotlight, and he of course didn't want that. So to reclaim his publicity, he sent Belly another soaked scrap of Paul Stein's shirt to prove that he was the real Zodiac. So Belly then made a public offer to meet with the Zodiac, but the Zodiac never contacted him again. So the attorney was only in contact with him that one time, and then that was it. So nothing ever actually came of that, unfortunately.
The Zodiac sent another message on November 8th, 1969. It was a greeting card that read, "Sorry I haven't written, but I just washed my pen and I can't do a thing with it," which was a play on a very popular slogan from a shampoo commercial at the time. The envelope also contained another coded message consisting of 340 symbols, and this time there wasn't a decoder working on it that was able to decipher the message, so it was never known what he had actually written. He then sent another letter the next day, and it was basically 6 pages of just rambling text, in which he said that he was angry at police for telling lies about him, and that he would change his way of collecting slaves for his afterlife by making it look like armed robberies or fatal accidents, basically so that they wouldn't look like murders that he had committed. He also refuted police claims that he had left behind any fingerprints at the Stein murder scene, and said that he was wearing a disguise during his crimes. He also said that he had plans on how to make a fertilizer bomb, and he included a hand-drawn diagram for that bomb. He also demanded that the people of the Bay Area wear buttons with the Zodiac symbol on it, like the cross in a circle. And when the people refused to do that, he said that he punished them by killing a man sitting in his car. Press reports also linked him to an unsolved attempted abduction of a woman in March 1970. The victim told authorities that she'd accepted a ride from a man who seemed really nice, but that along the way he had turned violent and was threatening her life. She claimed that she managed to escape from the man's car by jumping out of it, and the Zodiac later father also claimed that he was responsible for her abduction. Now, there are a lot of crimes out there that could be linked to him, a lot that we probably don't even know about. But I do also think that he was kind of on a high at that moment, and I don't necessarily know if every crime that he claimed was also one that he committed. But she did say that he looked a lot like the description they had of him. The fact that they were not able to catch the Zodiac over so many years was a serious embarrassment to the San Francisco Police Department, and he loved using that. He loved sending them letters that were constantly taunting them for having not caught him yet, and were constantly degrading the police department. There was another murder of a college student in Napa County, California. This happened in October 1966, so way before the very first known case in Benicia. Cherry Jo Bates was murdered near the campus of Riverside City College, and someone who claimed to be the killer had sent letters and notes to the police, a local newspaper, and even the victim's father. The Zodiac later applauded police for linking him to the crime and said that there were more victims that they still hadn't found. And again, I do believe that, but I don't necessarily believe that he committed every single crime that they think he did. By the summer of 1972, all communication from the Zodiac had stopped and the trail had grown cold. After he disappeared from the scene, the movie Dirty Harry was released in Hollywood, which was based loosely on the story of the Zodiac.
So after being quiet for just a few short years, the Zodiac resurfaced again in 1974. In a letter marked January 29th, 1974, the Zodiac offered up his review of the film The Exorcist, and he described it as the best satirical comedy he had ever seen, which is sick, but not surprising, I guess. The Zodiac demanded that that letter be printed in the newspaper and warned, quote, "or I'll do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of doing." He did not use the name Zodiac on the letter and suggested he had abandoned the persona and would use an improved alter ego. You can see that he's just having so much fun just taunting the media and the authorities, knowing that no one could find him. 1 month later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a very suspicious card, and it said, "Dear editor, did you know the initials SLA, which is the Symbionese Liberation Army, spell 𝓢, an Old Norse word meaning kill?" The card was signed, "A Friend." Over the next few months, the Zodiac sent a few other letters discussing, movies and advertisements, just enjoying himself with these letters. He then also began to discuss a columnist from San Francisco that he believed needed to be fired because he believed he suffered from a serious psychological disorder. So, of course, over the years, there have been many attempts to figure out who this man is. It wasn't just that the police was sitting on their butts and being like, "Hey, we can't do anything." There were a few suspects that came up, and one of the most famous is a man by the name of Arthur Leigh Allen, who he had been known for doing his own, crimes. The authorities knew him well, but they couldn't find anything that really linked him 100% to the crimes. And the Paul Stein scene at the cab, his fingerprints didn't match the fingerprints that they found on the car. Some people believe that he actually is, and then he just had a way of disguising that he was the Zodiac and he was a mastermind, but they couldn't really convict him because they had no solid proof. They also had people who like are experts in handwriting and all that try to match his handwriting with those in the letters, but they believed that that didn't match as well. So to this day, the Zodiac remains the most terrifying ghost in all American serial murder history. Some believe that the killer died a long time ago, and there are some who believe that he's still out there and he's laughing and taking joy out of the fact that he became so famous and that no one was able to find him. Some believe that he is planning one last letter and one last crime to finish off his story that he created of himself in American society. If that's true, I don't know. If he was in his mid-30s to 40s back then, it'd be a little old now. But that's the creepy thing, is that he's literally like a ghost. We don't know. He could have been younger than that, because we're kind of just going off of descriptions, but it's hard to pinpoint someone's exact age just by looking at them, you know? And because he's been so famous in American history and society, he went on to inspire movies, which I didn't know. When we were doing our research, we found that there's a movie titled Zodiac. I'm sure some of you know it. I had never heard of it, but it stars Mark Ruffalo, Robert Downey Jr., and Jake Gyllenhaal, which are three very well-known actors. So how I have never heard of that movie, I'm not sure. And I'm kind of interested in watching it. But that just goes to show you how, you know, much he has impacted, you know, our history. And it's a very creepy story. So if you want to look up that movie, it came out in 2007. I think I'm gonna look it up as well. So yeah, that is the story of the Zodiac Killer. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Thank you to both Yasna's or ASMR Zelda's subscribers and my subscribers for watching. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.